mission. Tell me what you mean, but without using that term. If anybody starts talking about mission, just forget that word, put it in other words. And ministry, oh yes, that's a mess of a word. It's so vague in modern religious language that it's as good as useless. That's my rant. I promise I won't say that again. Now, so, yeah.
Could you contrast this to the Calvinistic view of, law of God kind of as obedience and how that works? And we've been talking about God enacting sanctification as we enact the Word of God, we are sanctified. What happens for a Calvinist when they follow God?
Yeah. Okay, look, that will just take too long. That's an exercise for you to think. You probably know enough about Calvin to be able to work that out. And if you don't, just sit down with the Calvinists and get them to tell you. And it'll be a very interesting question. I don't want to dodge it. But what's more important is that you get your own theology straight. And it's in this area, it's the area of sanctification. If I can just jump right ahead, almost to the end of the course, that you get the biggest difference between Lutherans and Calvinists. Now, the Lutheran teaching on sanctification is that God makes and keeps us holy. It's God's work. And it's not just God's work 2,000 years ago on the cross, that we then need to appropriate by our obedience, but God makes us holy, keeps us holy. Sanctification is God's work in the strictest sense. Now, the Calvinist tradition is that sanctification is our works, is the life of good works after conversion. And we then sanctify ourselves, and so holiness and sanctification is closely connected with moral self-improvement. Now, holiness is not moral self-improvement. That's what most people think here in North America. If you call somebody a holy Joe, it's because they're a moralistic kind of a person. Moral self-improvement and sanctification are very closely equated. Not just in the Calvinist tradition, but also in the Wesleyan tradition. But that's going beyond my area. You get the systematicians and historians to deal with that. I'm Old Testament and Leviticus. Now, you remember that in the book of Exodus, God brings his people from slavery in Egypt to Mount Sinai. And something remarkable happens in chapter 20 of Exodus. God summons his people for a theophany, his appearance to them at the mountain. Remember, cloud covers the mountain, the glory of God on top of the mountain. Now, if this was a pagan story, the defining principle again, theophany, what would have happened then? At the climactic moment, Israel's there, Mount Sinai, cloud covers the mountain. What would have happened? The cloud would have parted and the Israelites would have seen God. The people would have seen God. Instead, you get a funny kind of theophany. God reveals himself not by showing his face, but by speaking. And what does he speak? The 10 Commandments. I'm the Lord your God, or I'm Yahweh your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, etc. And then you go through the whole 10 Commandments. Do you realize that those words, the 10 Commandments, are the only words that God speaks directly, face to face to his people? He reveals himself. That's the theophany. That's the content of the covenant. God's theophany is speaking to his people at Mount Sinai. And you remember they were so terrified by God speaking them face to face that they said, we don't want anything more of this. Moses, you go and deal with God, and you act as the mediator. And so the place where God speaks to his people, or God speaks to his people through Moses, and the place for the speaking of God is Mount Sinai, the top of the mountain. You remember each occasion when God wants to speak to Moses, he calls Moses on top of the mountain. And then Moses goes to the bottom of the mountain and he delivers the word of God to the people of God. Now, the book of Exodus ends with the consecration of the tabernacle. You have all the details, the law about the establishment of the tabernacle, the divine service of the priests. Now, at the end of Exodus, the tabernacle is consecrated, and then something remarkable happens. Do any of you remember what happens? God's glory leaves the top of the mountain. Where does it go? Into the Holy of Holies, and the cloud covers the whole of the tabernacle. So if you imagine the cloud covers the tabernacle, and God's glory is there in the Holy of Holies, the place where no one goes except the high priest on the Day of Atonement. The glory is in the Holy of Holies. So once again, a good Jewish scholar puts it beautifully, says that from this point on, the tabernacle becomes a mobile Mount Sinai. And the three parts of the tabernacle correspond to the three parts of the mountain. The Holy of Holies corresponds to the top of the mountain, we have the glory. The holy place corresponds to the body of the mountain covered by cloud. And the courtyard corresponds to the foot of the mountain. Okay? But what happens then is that the location of God speaking shifts at the end of Exodus, at the beginning of Numbers. Where's the place where God speaks? It's the tabernacle. And that's significant because it's not only speaking then. If the Israelites wanted to hear God speaking to them, where would they go? They wouldn't go to Mount Sinai. Where would they go? The tabernacle. And then that's replaced by the temple. That's the place for God speaking his word to his people. The place for revelation. So, two things here that's important for what's going to follow is, first of all, theophany is not God showing his face to people's eyes, but God showing himself through the word. So it's word theophany rather than eye theophany. And the location for revelation is the tabernacle. Next, the book of Leviticus is therefore part of an ongoing narrative. You know the big narrative in beginning with Exodus. Exodus, the Israelites leave Egypt, come to Mount Sinai. All of the book of Leviticus is located at Mount Sinai. And the first part of Numbers, up to Numbers 10, is still located at Mount Sinai. And then the rest of Numbers is the journey from Mount Sinai to the plains of Moab. Right? So the whole of the Pentateuch is constructed as a continuous narrative and as a journey in a number of stages. Even Genesis, basically, you have a prologue and then you have a journey. It's constructed as a journey, continuous narrative. Now, even though the book of Leviticus basically consists of speeches of God, there are patches of narrative that are very significant. Chapter 8 and 9, you have the consecration of the priests. God had given the law to Moses in Exodus 29 about how to consecrate the priests. Well, the priests were consecrated in Leviticus 8. In Exodus chapter 29 and in Leviticus 1 through to Leviticus 7, God gives the laws about the divine service and all the different aspects of the divine service. But it's not enacted until Leviticus chapter 9. Now, can you take particular notice of Leviticus 9? Because that's your foundational story. Your basic job as a pastor is to enact the divine service, to lead the divine service. Where in human history was the divine service first enacted fully? Here you have it. Leviticus 9, the inauguration of the divine service. And the divine service that you enact is a continuation, the fulfillment of the service in the Old Testament. So what you do is in that heritage. You with me? Okay, so you get 8 and 9, the narrative about the consecration of priests and the enactment of the divine service for the first time. And then in chapter 16, you get the story of the enactment of the Day of Atonement. And notice chapter 16, if you have a look at the way of the 36 chapters, it's right there in the middle of the book. The middle of the book, Day of Atonement. And if it's the middle of the book, what does that mean? It's important. And so you have the narrative about the Day of Atonement, and then, and that's connected back to an incident that happened at the beginning of chapter 10, where the 2 sons of Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, offered unauthorized fire to God and were killed as they came into God's presence. Now, to prevent that from happening, you get the Day of Atonement. So that's connected to a little incident at the beginning of chapter 10. And the counterpart to that is the stoning of the blasphemer in chapter 24. Okay, so the book of Leviticus consists of 36 speeches of God. Most of them are spoken to Moses as the mediator, and then handed on to the people of Israel. Some of them are spoken to Aaron as well. One of those speeches is spoken only to Aaron. 36 speeches. And those 36 speeches are set in a narrative context. And the most important features of that narrative context is going back to the book of Exodus, God's glory, leaving the mount, entering the Holy of Holies, and so that the tabernacle becomes the place of God speaking, and the divine service becomes the time when God speaks to his people, and you have the consecration then of the priests and the inauguration of the divine service, and the first enactment of the Day of Atonement. So you have speeches and narrative, part of the whole. Okay, end of that section. Now, any questions on what we've done thus far? I assume you've read the book, and if you haven't, then maybe tonight you can read it through. At least these narrative parts, yes.
Are you going to give us the other words for worship, mission, and ministry later on that you like better than those? Or
no, that's your task. You go. Yeah. But I'm giving you some resources to get that sort of question. Any question that I can answer? Yeah. Okay, anything else before we go? Now, to make sense of Leviticus, you need to understand the theology, the theological framework for this puzzling, strange book. Now, I want to spend quite a lot of time on this. Now, you guys, why don't you come forward here? There's pads and stuff here. You right? Oh, that's cool by me then. As long as you can hear me, and are you hearing my accent? Right. Yeah, okay. Ask a silly question, you get a good answer. Now, 2 basic statements. The whole of the book of Leviticus gives us a theology of worship. But it doesn't give us a theology of worship in abstract form, but in concrete form, in terms of what you do. Because worship is not basically, it doesn't have to do with ideas, but it has to do with enactment. The divine service is an enactment. So the whole of Leviticus has to do with the theology of the divine service. I'll try and avoid the word worship. theology of the divine service. And secondly, the key to understand worship, the divine service, and the theology of the divine service is holiness. So holiness is the key to it. And I also put it to you that unless you understand something about the biblical teaching on holiness and the Christian teaching on holiness, you won't make sense of the divine service that we have in the Lutheran Church, which is basically not the Lutheran liturgy, but it is the Western Catholic Mass. You won't understand the traditional service of word and sacrament unless you look at it from the point of view of holiness. I don't think you can make good sense of it if you just look at it from the angle of justification. You need to understand from the gospel, but it's hard to make sense of it just from that angle. So the divine service has to do with holiness. Now I want to start off with giving you the basic teaching on holiness in Leviticus, and then also in the whole of the scriptures. The starting point, the unexpected starting point of the Old Testament is a simple statement of fact that only God is holy. God alone is holy, and if God alone is holy, then nobody nor anything else is holy apart from God. Now this might strike you as being so obvious that it's stupid that I'm stressing it. But exercise the declining principle. If you went to the Canaanites and the Egyptians, if you go to the Hindus in India, that's stupid. Why? If you go to animist people like the Japanese, that dispute this, God alone is holy. Why? All the ancestors are holy. Animism basically is based on the premise that when you die, you really start to live. There are two groups of people. There are the living, and then there are living dead. And who are the holy ones? The living dead. They're holy. All of paganism has the teaching of many gods, and if there are many gods, then what's the logical corollary for that? Well, that's from Christian point. Just within their own frame of reference, if you want to talk about holiness, if there's many gods, then there are many sources of holiness, and there's many different kinds of holiness. No? The Old Testament teaching is, and this is fundamental, and it's so obvious yet has far-reaching consequences, that God alone is holy. No one is holy except the Lord. You know, that's repeated again and again in the Old Testament. Isaiah had the vision. What were the angels saying? Holy, holy, holy. And as you know from your Hebrew, if you repeat a word 3 times, it says that God's not only holy, but He is superlatively holy. He is intrinsically holy. He is absolutely holy. Now, the flip side of that means that you and I and nothing in creation is holy. It means that you can't make yourself holy. I can't make myself holy. Nothing that I can take hold of here in creation, apart from God, can make me holy. Nothing is holy except God. God is intrinsically holy. And if that's the case, then what's the only way that you can become holy? Yeah, touch and be with God. Okay? God's the only one who can do it. And you can only become holy by contact with God. Now that's fundamental. Everything follows from this. Yeah, brother?
Then it's God that has to do the consecration. Because in animism, we consecrate the dead and remove the impurity and make them an ancestor.
That's right. That's right.
So it's something we do, but
That's right.
it's all, even the consecration is all God's work.
Not even. That's the starting point. And that blows out of the water generic Protestantism. And most Protestants in North America haven't heard that. And this is what we Lutherans have to start teaching our people and getting through our churches into North America. That God alone can consecrate. God alone makes holy. And He is the one who establishes His means by which He makes people and things holy. Now, there's another corollary from this. If God alone is holy, then it means that of all the things, can I put it that way? If God alone is holy, then holiness is without parallel here on earth. You can't define holiness because as soon as you define something, you say it's like something else. You can't define holiness because you would then have to say, compare God and His holiness to something that is not God. God is the one who defines holiness as He defines Himself. And so there's no definition of holiness in the Old Testament, but you get this repeated self-declaration. I, the Lord, I, Yahweh, notice the holy name which is holy and makes holy, I, Yahweh, your God, am holy. Now, that's repeated again and again. So if you want to start off with holiness, you start off with God. And God declares Himself holy, and He defines holiness by giving us not an abstract theological definition, but by saying two things about Himself. He is Yahweh, the Lord, and He is, whose God? Your God. He is the God who is holy, and He gives us access to His holiness through His name by speaking His most holy name to us, the Lord. And He reaches out to us as our God and commits Himself to us as our God. The unexpected again. Generic Protestantism, paganism, the emphasis is on our commitment to God. What you have here? God's commitment to us. That's the basis for holiness, sanctification. God's commitment to us. God's gift of Himself, His name to us. I want to say a little bit about the name here. I don't have a board, but you know the teaching in the Old Testament about Yahweh. I don't have to explain that. I still remember one class that I had in Cambridge when I was studying there. I was the only Christian student in a class that was taken by a Jewish rabbi, and there were 11 of us, so there were 10 Jews, and I was the only Gentile, and it was only halfway through the class that the rabbi realized that I was a ringhead. And it was very interesting because there was a lot of in-house stuff that went on, because he assumed he was just talking to fellow Jews. He would have been much careful about what he said, but he realized not only was I a Christian, but a Lutheran, which they're bad because they have to do with Hitler. But I still remember one of the classes that he raised his questions rhetorically. He says, brothers, what is the greatest gift that the Blessed One has ever given to us? What is the greatest gift that God has, no, he didn't use the term God, the Blessed One has given to us? And he lifted up his finger. We never answered his questions because we knew they were always rhetorical. He said, Hashem, the name. Now, what is so special about the name? By God giving His name to His people, His personal name, He gives Himself to them. He commits Himself to them, and He connects then His name with His holiness. So the important thing is not theory of holiness, what holiness is, but the question is, how do you become holy? And the answer is God, His name, His commitment to us makes us holy. Can you turn to Leviticus chapter 19, verse 2, please? Leviticus 19, verse 2. Now what I'll do, some of you have quite nicely got your things here, and it'd be nice if all of you, if we filled in from the front backwards so that I can dob you in by looking at your name. Richard, I can see you here, so I'll pick on you then. Can we have Leviticus 19, verses 1 and 2?
The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the entire assembly of Israel and say to them, Be holy, because I, the Lord your God, am holy."
Number one, notice that this is, Moses is to say this to who? The entire assembly of Israel. Now, the term for assembly here is kahal. What is the New Testament term for assembly? Ecclesia, church, congregation. This is the only time that the book of Leviticus addresses a word, a speech of God, to the congregation, the ecclesia. And it's very, very important. What's the unexpected thing? God talks about holiness. If you come from a pagan background, who do you expect the talk about holiness to be addressed to? It's the priest. But here it is, the congregation. And notice the emphasis speak to what part of the congregation? The whole congregation, the entire congregation, the entire church. And you have one of the most important statements in the book of Leviticus. Notice there, it's translated as "Be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." Now, would it be possible for me to have a whiteboard here for future classes, if you don't mind? In Hebrew, it's not as obvious as that. What you have here, that's translated as "be," is the imperfect tense of hayah. Tik, you, imperfect. Do you remember your Hebrew? You've got two tenses in Hebrew. You've got perfect tense for completed action, and then you get the imperfect for incomplete action. This is imperfect tense. And the most obvious translation is not as an imperative, but as a present or a future tense. Tik, you, would be, you will be holy. The most obvious translation. If you didn't have any other things impinging on you, and if I put that Hebrew in front of you, you would translate it, you will be holy. Why? Because I, the Lord your God, am holy. So what is it? First, you will be holy. It's a promise. Now that's the starting point for all Lutheran teaching on holiness, Lutheran theology of holiness. It's gospel, not law. But notice how English translations turn it into law. It's not impossible. It's semantically possible. But semantically, all three of these are possible. You will be holy. So my emphasis, the thing I'd like to emphasize with you, is that the teaching of holiness begins with the promise of God. What's God's promise to the whole congregation, not just to the high priest, not to the priest, not to the select elite of Israel, the spiritual elite of Israel, the spirit-filled, tongue-speaking or whatever elite, but every single Israelite, God promises that they will be holy. That's number one. Secondly, you can translate it, all imperfects can be either translated as a future, but they can also be translated in present tense. The imperfect is the Hebrew present tense. And then how would it be translated? You are holy. And why are you holy? Because I'm holy. And then it's a statement of fact. And I can say this to all of you here. You will be holy. Number two is, you You are holy. Why are you holy? Because God's made you holy. You are holy. And then thirdly, you can translate imperfects as mild imperatives. Not hard imperatives, do this, but obligatory imperative. You are therefore obliged, you shall be holy. Now can you see the way it works in Hebrew? Which is the correct translation of those three? All three. But exegetically, where do you start? Theologically, where do you start with those three senses? You will be holy, that's the promise first of all. And secondly, then you go to, you are holy, the statement of fact. And then in the light of that, therefore you have the obligation to be holy. Now what's funny about this, because holiness doesn't have to do with actions, but it has to do with being. Can you see this? If you are holy, then why do you have to be holy? Can you see the problem? You're holy, and I'm saying, okay, be holy. This is good Lutheran theology. It's like, you're justified, therefore, act justly, be just. Be what you are. And make sure that nothing you do desecrates your holiness and God's holiness. So the imperative comes out of the indicative, the promise, and the statement of fact. That's good Lutheran theology, isn't it?
I don't have my Hebrew in front of me.
Yes.
The word for congregation, is that the Hebrew word adalmi, that there's the connection that we come in contact with God?
Yes.
Is that
it's a liturgical term. Just as ecclesia is a liturgical term, by the way, in the New Testament, despite what some scholars say.
But you mentioned that the word was not adah, it was kahal, is that?
Well, both of those are liturgical. Both of those are liturgical. Kahal is the gathering, and the edah is the meeting of the people. Now let me just check which one of the two is here. Speak to the whole, edah is here, not kahal.
Okay.
But both of those are translated as ecclesia in the Septuagint of the New Testament, and both of those are liturgical, and both of those have the idea of assembly. Now, if you want to distinguish between edah and kahal, the kahal, and put it in terms, are you a pastor? I'm the Concordia. Okay. You know that any given Sunday, you actually have as part of your assembly only part of the congregation. The kahal is the whole congregational membership. The edah is that part of the congregation that actually meets with God, because behind edah lies the word ya'av. We'll look at that more closely coming days, which has to do with the people that actually meet with God at that particular time in that particular place. But that's if you want to distinguish them. But in most cases they are synonymous, but they are liturgical terms.
And that understanding is the idea that this is how you're holy because you're brought into contact.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. It's through contact with God and the work of God that you share in the holiness of God. That's the basic premise. And notice what's the reason for the promise, the statement, and the demand? Is that God's holy. Now what God wants to do is to make us like Himself. So holiness has to do with being like God. Sharing in God's being, not just sharing in God's work, but sharing in the being of God. Participating in the being of God. Astonishing, amazing, wonderful. If you think of the consequences of that. Yeah.
How does this concept relate to the temptation of the fall?
Number one, get rid of the idea of concept. Dr. Norman Nagel, who used to teach at the other place, used to have a special coloured pencil, I'm told. I've never taught him. But whenever people spoke about the idea of, or the concept of, say, the concept of the church, the idea of atonement, now did you know about this? Yes, I did. Did you? Okay, do you know what he used to do? He would underline them. What was the point he was making? Or he'd highlight the colours or put a print, I don't know what it was. They are realities, not concepts. They are realities, not concepts. Okay, but how does this fit in with the fall? Okay, it presupposes the fall, and it's God's, what God does is in answer to the fall, because as you know, as a result of the fall, what is it that we lose of the image of God?
I guess with the temptation, he says to her, you will be like God.
Yes. And what's ironical about that? They already are like God. And through sinning, instead of becoming like God, they become unlike God. They lose their original holiness. Now what's God's aim? Beginning with the divine service here in the Old Testament, finding its fulfillment in Christ, is to restore the image of God. To restore the holiness that is lost as a result of the fall. Yeah. That's the short answer. Any other questions? Okay. Now, one of the most significant formulas in the book of Leviticus, and it occurs 7 times. Notice what's significant about 7? Complete, perfect number, is what scholars call the formula for sanctification. 7 times God says, I am the Lord who sanctifies. Now in Hebrew, in English, I've translated that as a present tense. I'm the Lord who sanctifies. In Hebrew, it is a participle. I am the Lord, the one sanctifying, to indicate that God doesn't sanctify people at one time and one place, but it's an ongoing thing of God, an ongoing activity, ongoing gift of God. 7 times God says, I am the Lord who sanctifies. Now, what's interesting, and it would be interesting for you, and as part of your notes I've given you the 7 references, is to look at them all in sequence and to sort them out and to work out why the first one comes first and the last one comes last. And if you want some help, then you just go to my commentary of the various ones, and I've spent quite a lot of time on that formula. What's interesting is that God says that he sanctifies 3 different objects. Now, the declining principle, unexpected. First of all, God sanctifies the Israelites, his people. And that's where it starts. Where would you expect it to start? With the priests. Notice it starts with the people, not the priests. Secondly, God says that he sanctifies things. And he sanctifies things in 2 different ways. He makes some things most holy, and he makes other things holy. And then thirdly, he sanctifies the priests. What's the most expected of these? This one. What's the most unexpected one of these? Tiny principle again, you can think of it. Middle. He sanctifies things. Things. Not just people. There is a theology of very strong revival of theology of holiness and sanctification, and it's much better than that Methodist Calvinist version that you have, which comes from by way of the Pentecostal movement and the charismatic movement that comes out of it. the basic emphasis on the charismatic teaching on sanctification is that people, holy people, make people holy. So Spirit-filled people communicate the Spirit of God. That's common theology. And you'll be surprised at how many of your members basically believe that. That Spirit-filled people, holy people, make people holy. What's the biblical teaching? No, behind it is the idea that God makes holy. God uses people to make people holy. And so people are the means of sanctification. What's the biblical teaching? No, that's presupposed by this. God's Spirit. How is God's Spirit given? Is it through people? Things. What things, brother?
Sacraments.
Not just the sacraments.
The word.
Word and sacrament. What we call means of grace. You realise that means of grace is not a Lutheran term. Yeah, naval, you feel. It's a Calvinist term. What's the Lutheran term? They're the means of salvation. If you go to Augsburg Confession, Article 5, means of the Spirit. What are the means of the Spirit? Word and sacrament. It's through holy things, most holy things, that God gives His Spirit, and God makes both people and other things holy. Common theology these days is that holy people make people holy. Spirit-filled people give the Spirit the Holy Spirit. That's Pentecostal theology. And it's also liberal theology. People make people Spirit-filled. Now, the surprise here is that God makes things holy and uses things to give His holiness to people. Let's have a look at these three passages that I've got up here. Jerry, if you haven't been too exhausted by my talking, can you go to the first one and look for the problem, look for the unexpected stuff here. Leviticus 20, verse, 7 and 8, let's have them both together.
Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am the Lord your God. Keep my statutes and do them. I am the Lord who sanctifies you.
I'm the Lord who sanctifies you. I'm the Lord who makes you holy. It's a participle. I'm the one sanctifying you. Who's the you here, Jerry? The congregation. So it's the congregation. I'm the Lord who sanctifies you. What's funny about this passage? Did he see something? Yes, sanctify yourselves. There's a contradiction. He says, sanctify yourselves and be holy, because I'm the Lord your God. And then he says, I make you holy. Okay, there you've got the problem. What's the solution? It's sitting right there before you. Have you worked it out? Let God do it. Get the answer. Okay, that's a new one. And how's that? What's significant there in the text? What lies between those two statements? Sanctify yourselves to be holy. I am the Lord who consecrates you. What lies between them? What?
Follow the decrees.
Follow the decrees. Which decrees? The decrees, the Word of God, which makes you holy. And how do you make yourself? Yeah, good, thank you. 5 minutes. We'll just finish it up. Okay. Can you spell that out there? How do you sanctify yourself? How did the Israelites sanctify themselves? They went to the temple and what?
And did the sacrifice.
They did the sacrifices. Well, in most cases they didn't do things, but they had things done to them.
Circumcision.
They had the service done to them. Put it that way. They followed the decrees, they enacted the decrees, they had the service done to them. How do you sanctify yourself every Sunday, Bill? Number one, through the absolution. And you do something, you confess your sins, and you receive it. So you sanctify yourself by receiving the absolution. How else do you sanctify yourself? By receiving the body and blood of Christ. And if I'm an unbeliever, not a Christian, how do I sanctify myself? Yeah, but not by baptizing myself, but by being baptized. Can you see it's receiving the things that are done, doing the things, or having the things done to you, by which God makes you holy. So what's the connection between the two? God establishes the means by which we sanctify ourselves, in the sense, not sanctify ourselves, make ourselves holy, but the Hebrew tense there, the Hebrew word is we receive sanctification. So, sanctify yourself means to receive sanctification. To purify yourself means to receive purification. Yes?
The liturgical enactment of the ritual statutes.
That's right. You got it. That's it. Hence that passage hence that verse between the two. Okay? God is the one who makes and keeps his people holy. How does he make and keep his people holy? Through the statutes which establish the divine service. So how do the Israelites sanctify themselves? By going to church. Let's put it that. They're just as simple as that. Now, I could stop the course here. Now, that gives you the key to understanding all of Leviticus. I'll shut down shop and you can work it all out from here.
These decrees are not the Ten Commandments here.
No, it's a different term.
How can you know that? Oh, it's a different term.
It's a different term. I don't have a book here. It has to do with the term hulk, which has to do with a ritual. It's the term for a ritual statute. Ritual statute, a ritual ordinance. And that's never used for the Ten Commandments. By the way, I don't know whether you realize that the Ten Commandments are never called the Ten Commandments in the Old Testament. At least, they're the 10 words. They're the 10 words, the Devarim. It's interesting that they're never called commandments. And that's puzzled scholars. And I must say, it still puzzles me to some extent, but very interesting. Another climbing, unexpected thing. Yes?
So when Christ says, I didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law,
Yes.
then it's just that fulfillment which then he bestows upon us. That's not fulfillment of it, but still we see that in the participation in the time of coming to receive it.
Absolutely. He noticed that Christ emphasized, I didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. So he doesn't come to abolish the law about holiness and purity and all the ordinances in the Old Testament. He fulfills them. And we have the fulfillment of them in the divine service. That's my basic thesis. Now, it is 3:55. We need to go and receive sanctification as a gift. And then just as far as time scale is concerned, 4:15, we reassemble here. I know I'm going to get myself a cup of coffee, and so after the service, let's do that, and we won't rush then into grab open